What's going on, gamers? We've got an interesting video here by Digital Foundry about more news on PSSR 2. It seems to be a hot topic lately, and I've been definitely enjoying covering it, and I appreciate all you guys' support. In this video here, we see, which I haven't really watched, but I'm taking a look at something. Sony's PSSR patent aims to replace dynamic resolution scaling, but how? Interesting. As you know, DRS was something that is used a lot before people had their own upscaling, and now Sony has a patent for PSSR or PSSR2. They're not going to call it PSSR2, but basically you could say that because that's where it's at, to replace dynamic resolution scaling. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do that and what's going to be happening here. Digital Foundry is going to be covering it. Let's get into this. Let me know what you guys think as usual. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's go.
Okay, so interesting story that has emerged. It appears that Sony Interactive Entertainment has filed a new patent concerning machine learning-based upscaling, which some people believe could be part of the upcoming PSSR 2.0. I'm suspecting it's probably more for a PlayStation 6 style scenario. But this is quite an interesting thing. There's talk of actually adjusting the quality of the upscaling based on available frame time. The idea being that rather than scaling resolution as such with dynamic resolution scaling, you instead scale the precision of the machine learning based upscaling. Now, it's an interesting idea. I'm kind of curious what you make of this, Oliver, because I thought the whole point of AI upscaling was actually to produce those upscaled frames with a very, very short frame time already. So you have more time to spend on actually rendering the frame. So, so I'm kind of curious as to what this means.
That's the fundamental problem with this approach, or at least maybe not problem is the right term, maybe limitation of this approach would be the right term, but maybe I'll touch on that in a second, if I can go through just the basics, the technical basics here. The kind of idea they sketch out in this patent is they want to stabilize frame rate without cutting pixel counts. And given that super resolution is expensive, or at least it can be, why not drop super resolution quality instead of DRS? Makes some.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you guys know about super resolution with NVIDIA. I mean, obviously AMD has this as well too, but this is very interesting. One known technique for increasing the complexity and realism of graphics is multi-frame super resolution, right? Multi-low resolution images of the same scene, a sequence of low resolution images frames are fused to generate a higher resolution super resolution image of the same scene. So Sony's thinking about ways to make that be less demanding while giving you better performance and image quality. I think that's going to be interesting.
Sense there. And the idea is basically they store, in terms of how they do technically, they're going to store multiple versions of the upscaler at different precisions and swap them out to align with the current frame time needs, or keep a single model and quantize the model's weights in real time if the load increases too much. And then they describe this whole convoluted system for doing that and managing load and averaging load and checking that out and doing all this complicated stuff. The problem with it is I don't really see the utility for this in a lot of cases when you could just vary resolution, use DRS instead. Yeah. Because that's a really effective tool. Like if you have a game and you have like let's say a 720p to 1440p resolution window in your game, which would be like, a little bit of a big window, but that's something we might see in a current generation game. You're going to reclaim like 8 milliseconds, a ton of GPU time going from 1440p to 720p internal, even if you're still upscaling to 1440p at the end with some kind of temporal upscaler. You can reclaim a lot of time. And with this, the amount of frame time that's implicated by an upscaling process, like PSSR1 is said to be about 2 milliseconds to go from 1080p to 4K. 2 milliseconds is not a lot. And even if we're talking about PSSR2, again, perhaps the budgets have ballooned for that. I suspect they haven't based on a number of factors, but I would assume that it's not a gigantic amount of frame time, especially when you're talking about a 60 FPS game. So if we're talking about slicing off 2 milliseconds or 2.5 milliseconds or 1 millisecond, I don't think it's that meaningful. I could potentially see this being more useful though at ultra high frame rates. So if we're talking about a game that's natively at 120 FPS, 2 milliseconds is like a quarter of your frame time.
Yes.
Very few games, I mean, no games to my knowledge, at least that I've reviewed, have used PSSR at 120 FPS, whatever. That's just too expensive.
I think that does make more sense for PSSR 2 and PSSR 3 for PlayStation, because now you're going to be able to see that. We saw that with Resident Evil hitting 120 frames per second. So if they are going to do that, definitely for competitive games, when you're running around like games like Call of Duty and stuff, and you have PSSR 2 being able to give you 80, 90, 100 frames, maybe 120, then yeah, it will matter for that 2.5 milliseconds, because you want that to be as optimal as possible in competition and stuff like that. Maybe they have something like that in state for something like that. I get what he's saying if you're thinking on it historically, but we're talking about PSSR 2 now and what that's going to be able to do. So it is going to be interesting to see how they do that. If they're going to be replacing dynamic resolution scaling, I don't know. We're going to be finding out, but there's a patent for it. So
maybe it's less expensive if you're doing it to like 1440p, but it's still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So maybe getting like a pretty steadily lower quality version of that upscaler, that could be a good deal. That would be kind of like with the approach we see with Nintendo shipping the light DLSS model and the full fat CNN DLSS model. You know, those are different approaches for different kinds of upscaling scenarios. We could see something similar here. Another area where I could see this being useful is games that aren't limited primarily by, you know, pixel throughput. They're more compute limited. They're more RT limited. Games like Metal Gear Solid Delta, where maybe it actually makes more sense to cut time out of the upscaler than to try to reduce pixel count dynamically to adjust load. Maybe that makes more sense. I also think in some scenarios, we see in some games that DRS can interact unfavorably with upscaling, and it can produce some odd artifacts. So maybe, again, I don't know what the artifacts from this approach would look like, but maybe this approach, quantizing the model, reducing the precision and whatever, that might actually produce a better result in the moment, or maybe you're seeing like larger additional artifacts and instability in the image, but the image is not changing so fundamentally in the way that you can see sometimes in the way that upscalers like FSR can interact with large DRS swings and kind of make the image look unstable and fuzzy and jitter all over the place.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in every game, but in some games, I think we see a deliberately constrained DRS range to prevent some of that behavior going on, because I do observe it in some console titles.
that is a problem.
So yeah, just a few thoughts. I think it's weird because I saw this and I see the framing in various articles about this technique, and people are talking it up as if it's some, you know, God's gift to console image quality or God's gift to console performance. I don't really see that. It's like you're playing with 2 milliseconds of frame time. So how much are you going to do with it? I mean, you could do something interesting, but not a whole lot.
Depends on what Mark Sony wants to do.
Yeah, I don't know.
What do you think, John?
Man, I mean, you pretty much tackled everything.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think the main thing is, of course, that yes, 2 milliseconds in a 16 millisecond frame for 60 FPS is, you know, it's still fairly substantial, I think. But
yeah, 2 milliseconds is a lot. But yeah.
But when your frame time is 8.3 milliseconds, suddenly your 2 milliseconds is like somewhat more substantial. The question is, surely you would have something like you would just use the lower precision model at 120 frames per second, similar to what Tiny DLSS is doing on Switch 2 to enable like 60 FPS upscaling. The concept of it switching precision, how valuable is it? It's not. I still don't think it's going to replace dynamic resolution scaling as such.
Maybe not at 60 frames. I get what he's saying. But I think when it comes to PSSR 2, the reason why Sony is filing this patent is because you're going to see a lot of games being able to get 120 frames per second options, or at least try to do it. If Requiem can do it, I mean, they had to take off ray tracing. I think a lot of other games can do it. And basically what they're saying, guys, is that it is very difficult to kind of do that. And I don't see why it would be needed unless they have some type of crazy trick for 60 frames per second mostly. But when you think about 120 frames, yeah, that's definitely going to matter. And that's pretty much what they're talking about here. So you guys are not confused. And I'm curious what people say down here. Man, every day I'm waiting for my Pro to update to PSSR 2. Sony taking their sweet time releasing it. Mark Sony said on the PS5 Pro seminar that the prerogative of my consoles is fixed frame rate and variable resolution, while PC generally fixed resolution and vary frame rate. True. That's just taking advantage of it. If a game on PS6 only needs 10 ms to render at 60 frames per second, the PSSR can take the other 6 milliseconds, making a better result. That would also help backwards compatibility since older games will run faster on newer hardware, leaving more time for a better PSSR. That's the perspective from him for this new patent. You can't approach it as a PC upscaler. You know what? He actually has a good point there. That's another good way of adding things here. But it's basically what I was saying. It's going to work on older games. It's going to work very good with PS6. It's going to work good with PSSR 2 on the PS5 Pro, obviously, so that you will be able to play previous games that are already out up to 120. If you can do it on Rec Room, you'll be able to do it on a lot of other games. Definitely competitive games like COD and stuff like that, and even Marathon and other games. So we basically get the idea then. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. The funny thing is about patents, of course, is that a lot of it is just theoretical stuff that they just want to cover their bases for in terms of protection. Most patents aren't actually ever actioned as such. I mean, I know some people that work at first-party platforms that, they've got a lot of patents, but none of the stuff actually ever made, a shipping product. Mm-hmm. So, but nevertheless, clearly it's something that's had some time put into it.
Mm-hmm. This would be an inordinate amount of work, I'm sure, but perhaps we could do that test in, I think, God of War Ragnarok, where it ships with TAA and it ships with PSSR, and maybe with this new PSSR, you could go in and you could actually try to measure if there is any frame time cost variance between a PSSR at different levels of frame times, different levels of performance, or something like that. That would be like a very, because I mean, this might actually make some things slightly more complicated from our end, just in terms of computing that PSSR frame time. Not that it's of terrible interest to anyone but us, just because of the, potential variance there. But again, I kind of suspect this is not implemented in the new PSSR. I suspect this is just, covering their bases, establishing a new patent without prior art. This is a novel technique. Perhaps it could be more useful in the future with other kinds of, like, more intensive ray reconstruction-like variants that you might see in the future.
That's a possibility.
More intensive neural networks that are reconstructing larger parts of the image, that are doing more to the image. Maybe it's more relevant there, but at least PSSR, I don't think it's making a huge difference.
Right.
Maybe. I know everybody wants to learn everything you can about PSSR 2 because it's right around the corner. And like I said, I want to cover every topic possible. But I really think that this is something that could be applied to games that are hitting 120 frames per second on the PS5 Pro with PSSR 2. It's obviously not for PSSR 1. And like I said, we saw that with Requiem, so that already gives you an idea. Marathon for sure is getting 120 frames, and it doesn't have PSSR 2 yet, from what I understand. And other games, you know what I mean? There's a lot of games coming out, so... And maybe it may be for games that probably get 80, 90 frames that are beyond 60. We've seen that with certain games that Sony has done even last year, which I think is pretty nice. So that's why I like Digital Foundry videos. They always find out all this stuff. And, what that one guy said actually was the best comment. And he says having dynamic resolution scaling is far better than any upscaler, as it means the actual resolution will be automatically higher when better hardware becomes available. True, when you think about it from a PC perspective, I get what he's saying, most likely. But if it's to the extent of what this guy right here was saying, that when you think about consoles, it's fixed frame rate and variable resolution, whereas with PC, it's fixed resolution and variable frame rate. That's just taking advantage of it. And like he was saying, if a PS6 only needs 6 or 10 milliseconds to render at 60 frames, then PSSR can take the other 6 milliseconds, making a better result. It may be something specifically that Mark Sony has going on. He can do that type of stuff with AMD that may come up with stuff. You can't always get fixed on the way technology works. There's always ways to improve it. So that's what I kind of think. But we're going to find out what it's about over time.
I think the other thing, of course, is that the success of dynamic resolution scaling in this particular console generation. I mean, Microsoft came in saying they had the most powerful console, and they did on paper. And yet, in titles where there is a resolution advantage, it is typically higher DRS counts. And can you really tell the difference against the PlayStation 5 version? It's kind of yes, if you're doing like side-by-side comparisons and, we're taking a good close look at the footage.
Yeah, zooming in.
In the actual heat of the action, there's not really that much difference at all. And that kind of is slightly concerning from my perspective, looking forward to the next generation Xbox, which is this, super high-end APU, which is apparently considerably more powerful than the PlayStation 6 equivalent. But is it just going to be history repeating itself? Will it actually produce a meaningful difference? I think I'm with Alex on this, where if you've got like a more potent GPU, you should be using it for extra features as opposed to extra resolution in this particular era. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you think, John.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you on that. That's about it. I don't really have much to add to this one at this point, though. So
That's pretty much what I said. It's getting to the point now, it doesn't matter. Once you reach those type of specs, it's over. Like, everything is going to be incredibly good. So we have a potential for something else coming to PSSR 2. I guess we'll find out in the next week or so, right? Let me know what you guys think. Is there anything that you know about DRS and about Sony having a patent to replace it? What do you think about it? Could it be something that's specifically for PlayStation? And could it be more relevant to what that guy was saying about consoles versus PC when it comes to what to focus on when it comes to this type of technology and upscaling? Let me know down in the comments below. Peace out, guys. Just trying to bring you more topics on PSSR. Let's go. Later.